Welcome to the Miami Valley Skeptics podcast. Today is July 6, 2014. Hello, I'm your co-host Brad.
This is Elise.
This is Jacob.
This is Russ.
This is Jason.
And I'm Eric.
Today we're going to be talking about childhood indoctrination and Christian church camps. And we happen to have a guest with us today, Matt Kovacs, who was the media director for the Scioto Hills Camp and Retreat Center, formerly known as the Scioto Hills Camp and Baptist Camp?
Baptist Camp, yeah.
All right. So here you are sitting with us now as on the other side of belief, and we want to kind of find out about your involvement with the camp and what led you to where you are now. I rewatched the documentary Jesus Camp. If you guys haven't seen it, I would highly recommend you watch it. It's pretty disturbing. There's some pretty militant indoctrination going on in that style of evangelical camp. I would venture to guess that there's probably a little bit of difference between that and the camp that you were at, but can you kind of tell us what the experience would be like for a camp goer there?
Yeah, we didn't duct tape children like they do in that video. But I have seen Jesus Camp. It's been a couple years. No, we weren't as radical as that. You know, we did have the worship music, you know, and the typical week of a camper, we had three different age groups, but mainly throughout the summer, the two different age groups where we had the, 8-year-olds to the 12-year-olds, and then the 12-year-olds to the 14-year-olds. Then once a summer, they had their high school camp, which they called Revolution Camp. But most of the time throughout the summers, there's two different age groups, and they were in two separate parts of the camp across the lake. There was a big lake, they were across the lake, but they would arrive in the big field, do their registration, then go up and meet their cabin. And, you know, the younger kids obviously was a little more structured on bedtime, and their chapel sessions were about 6 p.m. before it got dark. They didn't get to stay up late, but, you know, even at that young age, we were pushing them, you know, make a decision for Christ, you know, talking to them about hell. But most of the kids that age were already in Christian homes. There wasn't too many that just, you know, had no idea about God or hell or any of that. Because, you know, they were 8, 10, 11 years old, so the parents knew what they were getting themselves into. They were already raising them. The majority of what we call new frontier camps were, you know, already being raised in that. But the alpha camps, which was, you know, pre-high school, you know, in freshman year sometimes, some of those, they weren't as indoctrinated, you know. So in their chapel sessions, they had 2 chapel sessions, one right after lunch and one, you know, about 8 p.m., 9 p.m. after doing physical activities. And that was, whether intentional or not, there was always heavy physical activities right before chapel. We would have them, you know, do, you know, running for a half a mile through hiking or climbing a rock wall, something physical to drain them, you know, right after dinner. Then they go to chapel and they're drained emotionally, mentally, and then they sit through this worship song where they have, you know, raise your hands to Jesus and really get them emotionally drained, and then have the sermon, the charismatic, you know, preacher, usually a youth pastor who would come along and preach. Every week it was somebody different. It was usually a youth pastor, sometimes ex-staff members. And then we would do the altar call. But at the end of the week, every Friday, the last night, because the campers left on Saturday, we would have the late night bonfire. This was, and if I'm wrong on this to people listening, and it's not intentional if I get my facts wrong, but I think it was 11 p.m. to midnight. They were up all day. It was, you know, 5 days at camp, getting 4 hours of sleep at night. Then we have them do all these emotional activities, and the last night at camp we have a bonfire, and just an acoustic guitar, guy playing acoustic guitar, and this charismatic preacher talking about, you're going to go back into your homes and be faced with temptations, and the devil's going to tempt you and push you, and we need you to make that decision today. We need you to know before you leave here, you know what you're getting into, and you're ready to commit your life to God. And that was the most, I guess, salvations occurred at that last night at camp, because it was that sitting. And whether intentional or not, we knew, I think, we were getting them emotionally free, is what I would call it. We were getting them, tearing down that emotion and then building it back up to how we wanted it. So that's a typical week at camp.
Was there a lot of direct guilt and shame and fear put into kids throughout some of the presentations? For instance, you were born a sinner, and some of you are leading double lives, and I need you to come up here and admit what you've done and have your hands washed by the blood of Jesus. And I mean, does that kind of thing, did it go on in the camp that you were at?
Absolutely. We, one of the Revolution camps, which was our senior high camp, it was mainly junior and senior. We did this presentation where we built a wooden cross. We would get little Post-it notes and write down all of our sins and regrets on these Post-it notes and nail it. A guy had nails and nail it to the cross. And then we would wash our hands, that now we're free. We're new in God. So that was, again, the last day of camp. That was after 6 days of a lack of sleep and physical activities of playing sports, playing soccer, running track, swimming, climbing rocks, hiking. And then we build this cross, give a sermon about you don't want to end up in hell. This is your eternal soul. Jesus loves you. He did all these things for you. He built this glorious heaven for you. And all you have to do is write down your sins and forgiveness. And, I remember one kid wrote down, and I'm trying to make sure I say this right, because I know the people listening who are believers are going to bash me on this if I get this wrong. So I think it was a guy, he was probably about 18. He wrote down he had homosexual desires, and he nailed it to the cross. That to me that's brave of him to do that. That out of all the kids who were there, he was probably one of the more sincere ones. Because most of the kids would write down, I have, I'm selfish, or, I argue with my parents or whatever. But this kid actually wrote down, I'm struggling with homosexuality. And then they prayed with him and, asked God for forgiveness to remove this sin from your life.
The kind of forced humiliation really breaks down a kid's self-worth and freedom of thought. I think that the subjugation that they would then be put under to the rest of the group, that, I'm such an awful person, and, all these people know all these bad things about me, but then, they sweep in this positive, well, we're going to help you. If you just pray, then everything will be okay, and everything will change. And if it doesn't change, well, you just need to pray some more. And it's never that there's something wrong with what we're teaching you. It's always you're the person who has a problem, and you got to fix that. And if you can't fix it, it's your fault. It's not ours. That we can help you overcome whatever temptation it is that you're trying to overcome. Did you feel like you were fulfilling a higher purpose by being there at that camp?
Absolutely. I was considered by my church a missionary, and I was raised Baptist, and my family's, as far as I know, are still Baptist. We don't talk much about religion anymore. But I went to a Christian school where they taught, it was called Accelerated Christian Education, and they taught evolution was wrong. They actually argued that dragons were for, evidence the existence of dinosaurs and humans together. Crazy stuff like that. So I was raised in that environment, and my church would always send kids to this summer camp, Scioto Hills. That's where I first heard of it. I never went there as a student, but I was going to college, and I was going to go to Ohio State, and I just wanted to do something fun for God before I went to college. So I signed up online, did my interview, and my first summer there, I was just like a ground staff, because I was right out of high school, I had no experience. So I was told the wrong date for staff training. I showed up a week late.
Ooh.
So the interesting thing, though, when I get there, I'm like, I go to the drive up to the office. It was about 4-hour drive from my house, and I've never been to this camp before. There's no one around, I'm thinking, I must be the first person here. I go to the office. The lady's like, who are you? I'm like, well, I'm at Kovacs. I'm here to work. It's like, we thought you quit or you weren't showing up because staff training's over. It's the last day of staff training. And there's no one on camp. And I didn't know why. The reason it was all awkward and no one was on camp was the maintenance director, who was the longest tenured staff, his wife had just passed away that morning. So I arrived the very day his wife passed. I had no idea. So it was that whole first summer, I never met this guy, who was a pretty big part of my life later on, but I never knew who he was. No one even talked about it. It was very kind of awkward that I didn't even know his wife had passed away until that next year I came back full time. I never met the guy who was gone all summer. So I walk into the dining hall and there's about 3 or 4 staff members and no one's talking to me. I'm like, these people are antisocial. No one likes me. And I had never been in this environment. But that night we had a special service and things went on as normal. And I still had no idea, his wife had just passed, that morning. No one talked about it. But I remember they're playing the songs and they're playing these worship songs I've never heard of. I'm like, I don't know anybody here. Everyone's kind of cold toward me. They've already made their clicks. I better start singing these songs and act like I know what they are. They're going to think I'm not a real believer. So I start raising my hands by myself. I'm sitting by myself, and I start acting like I know the words to these songs. I've never heard it before.
So it wasn't the spirit that motivated you to raise your hands?
No, it was. I'm the new guy. No one's talking to me. And I found out later they're not talking to me because they're all sad and depressed. But I'm just thinking, they're looking at me like I'm the outsider. Is he really a Christian? So I have to start raising my hands and mouthing the words to songs I've never heard of. And eventually, later on, the guy, his name was Tim. He came to me and he started play this game Carpet Ball, if you're familiar with that. Because he saw I was like a loner, and they realized, oh, that's that Matt guy who never showed up. And he was about my age. He was on ground staff too. And we played Carpet Ball, and we started talking. We became pretty good friends throughout that summer. But that first summer, I didn't do like any type of video work. I did grounds. I mowed grass. I picked, weeds.
Gotta earn your keep.
Yeah, and the problem with doing that, it was more of an emotional experience as opposed to being a camper. Because when you were on ground staff, you got up 6 a.m. every morning. You would run a mile or 2 miles. It was part of their things with the staff is to keep you physically in shape. So I would get up 6 a.m. every morning, started out as 1 mile, and eventually by the end of the summer, we were running 5 miles. So then after that, we'd go to breakfast. After breakfast, we'd start mowing. We'd push mow this giant hill or get on this riding lawnmower, and we'd mow till lunch. Then after we eat lunch, after lunch, we'd go do build a cabin or something like that, some physical labor. Then after that, till about 5 o'clock, we'd get a shower, go to dinner, go to chapel, go to bed. Wake up, do the same thing over again, non-stop. It was crazy physical labor. And it would emotionally drain you because every morning, my day was broken up into, my day ended at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock after dinner. Got a shower, went to chapel, went straight to bed. And that's how my day was broken up. Got about 6 hours of sleep. The only day off we had half a day Saturday and all day Sunday. Then Monday, 6 a.m., it's back at it. But Saturday, you're up at 6 a.m. too, getting the camper's luggage, taking it down to the van so they can pack it up. And Sunday, you're up for church. So every day, it's up early, nonstop all summer. You had a day and a half off.
You said that you had learned that all the other camp counselors or leaders or whatever that were in your age group were all depressed. And is that because of all the extensive labor? Or
I want to say they're depressed. It was an emotionally high time. I have good memories there, and it's that's why I went back. Because in hindsight, it's like, wow, looking back, it's like I did a lot of physical work. I was exhausted. I had no energy, but it's because of that you're on this emotional high nonstop for 3 months straight. You're on a submarine with like-minded people who are going through the same stuff with you, and you bond with them,
Sure.
Like I'm sitting here picking weeds with this guy next to me, and it's 100 degrees out, and it's like we're just talking about God, talking about,
You're in the struggle together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we're bonding, and, there's still some friends I have from that period today who, know I'm an atheist, and at the beginning, I was ready to quit because it was hard. It wasn't what I signed up for.
No one was talking to you.
Yeah, no one was talking to me. I'm like, what am I getting myself into? That first week or two, I'm like, I want to go home because I'm in a cabin. We were in a one-room cabin, small. It was probably about smaller than the room we're in now, and no insulation, a screen door. That's what we lived in for that first summer. With bunk beds and stuff. There were spiders, giant little wolf spiders, always in our sleeping bags every night. I'm like, this is miserable. Why am I doing this? But I stuck through it and just kept telling myself, well, I'm doing it for God. God has a purpose for me here. And
well, really, to me, it kind of sounds like you had an overall positive experience doing it. And I mean, you have some fond memories and some friends still. You said, do you think that there's anything harmful about church camp? I mean, I know we touched on the indoctrination aspect of it, but
well, that's what I'm getting to.
Okay.
So my first summer was over. I went to college for 1 year, Ohio State University. While I'm at college, I'm going to get my facts wrong, so people forgive me if I do. Chuck was a new executive director. The old executive director quit. Then he was related to the woman who passed away at the beginning of that summer. So he quit and moved on, put in his notice in. Chuck came along. I think Chuck called me and, asked, or I may have entered there. I may be getting my facts wrong. But I went back to camp, interviewed for the position of media director because I said, hey, I can do something good with this. This is what I'm interested in doing. So I do that. It was just supposed to be a summer job. I do that through the summer, create videos and stuff. But while I'm at Ohio State, something interesting happens. I take an astronomy course. And throughout my life, I was raised Baptist through accelerated Christian education, 6-day creation. And I remember my astronomy course, they talk about the age of the universe and the age of the earth. And I realized they're not just making this number up. Like I was told, like they're just pulling it out their butt. There's just a number they pull out of thin air. There's a reason they think the universe is 14.5 billion years old. I was raised just a number they made up to deny God. And it didn't make me an atheist yet, but it made me start realizing there's actually reasons they think these things. It's not just something they made up to deny God. And then I realized not everybody actually believes in God. I was raised, everybody knows God's real. People just lie about it and deny it. No, there's no real atheist.
Because they want to be sinful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when I got to college for that first year, I realized, again, it didn't make me an atheist. It just started opening my mind that there's actually reasons people think this about the universe. And there's actual evidence people have about evolution. I didn't believe in evolution yet. So I go back to the Christian camp, get hired to work under a guy named John, making videos and promotional materials for that summer only. It was just a summer job. And I do that throughout the summer. It was a lot easier work. And then after that summer, I get a call from Chuck. That's when I got the call from Chuck, who was the executive director at the time, and asked me, why don't you come back and do this for, through the off season for a year? And we can't really afford to pay you that well, but, God will bless you and all that. And I wasn't baptized at this point. When I told that to my pastor, he felt like it would be sinful of me to go into the mission field not baptized. Mm-hmm. So that's when I got baptized, right before I went to work full-time.
You're kind of old to get baptized.
Yeah, I was 19, maybe. And it just never really, no reason. I just never thought it was necessary for salvation. Because we're Baptists, we think salvation's through faith, not through baptism. So.
Right.
But he baptized me, and this is, I'm trying to remember the dates here. He baptized me. Then I go to camp, and I start working there. And immediately, I don't do just video work, because during the off season, there's only minimal staff. I would clean all the cabins after the guests left and all that, and that's when I met, certain friends, and it was a good time there. But I started seeing the inner workings and realizing the people who I looked up to as Christians, they're humans, and they're also doing things which I disagree with morally, and they, not really backstabbing each other, but just kind of out for their own interests. It's ran like a business. It's not ran like putting all their faith in God. And I remember we were doing a prayer meeting, and they asked each of us for prayer requests. And I said, why don't we pray for the Pope's salvation? Do we truly believe God can do anything? And that's how... And they looked at me like, well, come on, this is a serious thing here. Let's take serious prayer requests. I'm like, well, why can't we pray for the Pope's salvation? None of us think he's a Christian. Imagine if God converted him. Well, that's just not going to happen. So, serious prayer request only. So, and that, I remember when they said that made me realize, well, these people I looked up to spiritually, they don't think God's powerful enough to do that. And the little seeds of doubt throughout there. And then when the summer came along and the kids started arriving again for camp, and it started to bother me when I realized we're purposefully planning them to be emotionally drained to find God. Is God powerful enough where he doesn't need us to do that? But yet, here we are tearing down their emotions and their preconceived notions so God can sneak himself in. And I stopped, raising my hands in worship, and I was still a Christian at this point. I just felt like if God's this powerful, we don't need to do this. And I think my problem was I made God too big. And then for me, it's like, well, if I'm making God truly as big as these people say he is, then he can't exist. God, if God's as big as I want him to be, and they really say is, the Pope should be a Baptist. We shouldn't have to emotionally drain kids to find Jesus and scare them into hell.
It should be easy.
Yeah. And that started to bug me. And I remember my girlfriend at the time, I was reading the Bible in my office, and I came across a passage in Luke and a passage in Mark about how Jesus calls the disciples. And that's when it hit me. They're contradictory. They don't match up. One has, it was something simple, but it was like Jesus goes to John and James on a boat. They're together. And Jesus calls them, and they drop the fishing and leave. In the other passage, it's just John there. And then John goes home to get James, and a couple of days later, they go find Jesus again. And I looked at that, and that's the first time I realized the Gospels contradict each other. And I'm sitting in my office at camp while the kids are over there having lunch. And immediately I go get my girlfriend, bring her over, and say, look at this passage. It struck me that much that I have to tell somebody about this. I just discovered something no one ever discovered because no one's mentioned it before. Holy smokes, the Bible contradicts itself. And I go get her, and she just looks at it. She's like, yeah, I don't see the contradiction. Like, how do you not see that? Look, it's not, both of them can't be true. Yeah, you just don't understand it. So I went to the pastor of the church and showed him, and he said, something along the lines of, well, we shouldn't question those things. It makes sense. You're just not looking at it through God's eyes. And it really bothered me. That was the first time I realized the Gospels contradict themselves. And in that summer, I started picking it apart more and more and more. And someone got me the book, The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel.
Mm-hmm. Classic.
And I read that book, and I was so disappointed that this is the best evidence we have as Christians, is this. I'm not even trying to disprove it. And just like that, I realized it's full of holes and dishonesty.
And they basically just repeat all the same crap you've heard your entire life anyway.
Exactly.
There's nothing new. Yeah.
So my friend, who now works at a camp in South Dakota, we go to watch a movie. I want to say it's that Ben Stein movie.
No religion allowed. Expelled, no religion allowed.
We watched that movie, and on the way back, he's just laughing like, yeah, see how stupid evolution is? And I say, well, even if it's like, that's not evolution. He's making up his own version of evolution, and they're not even attacking the real evolution at this point. And he's getting mad at me like, what are you, an evolutionist? What are you sticking up for? It's like, well, no, but at least attack what really evolution says. Don't make up your own version and attack it. That's what this movie's doing.
Sure, if your position's true, you don't need to
exactly
resort to that type of
I realized, they're being dishonest and defending themselves. So why do I want... So then I started searching more and more. And after that summer ended, I stayed on a little longer, but at that point I would say I with certainty knew the Christian God wasn't real. About August of that year, I wouldn't say I was an atheist, but I knew there's no way the Christian God of the Bible could be real. And I was still there, still going to church. But it's like, what do I do? Do I quit? I mean, I've spent 2 years at this place. I've built up, a resume, relationships, my entire, so much adult life at this point is with these people who I respect. But it's like, and I tried quietly discussing it with them. We're teaching kids this stuff that I can show you is dishonest. Like we had a guy come in, do a sermon for the younger kids, 8 to 10 years old. And he started showing slides of the galaxies and black holes and, a diagram of black hole Hawking made and like star clusters. And he showed, what's the name of that cluster? The Eye of God, where the star nursery.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
But he showed a picture of that. And he said, evolutionists will tell you that this has been around for billions of years, but we know this is exactly how God made it. Because were you there? He actually used that line. And that hit me as like, we're doing the same thing. We're being dishonest. Intentional or not, we're telling these kids as a fact something we either haven't researched ourselves or purposely being dishonest. Either way, it's like, that's unethical. And I'm a part of this. And we're teaching this to children that they're going to go home and they're going to be like me when they go to high school or out in a real college. Like I went to Ohio State, and you're going to be embarrassed that when you try to stand up for your faith, like I did at Ohio State. I was in a philosophy class one time, and he started talking about Hume and Hume's problem of induction and all that, and discussing why creationism shouldn't be taught in schools. And I stood up. I didn't stand up. I raised my hand and made a point, which I don't remember the point now, but it was completely illogical about how, creationism is equal to, evolution because they're both science and theories. But that's what I was taught. But, the professor looks at me and he doesn't embarrass me. He just says, now's not the time to talk about that. If you want to talk about it after class, we'll talk about it after class. So he was very polite, didn't embarrass me. But that was because I was indoctrinated from the beginning with this dishonesty that we have to force upon people in order to strengthen our beliefs. And I realized that's what we were doing at camp. Intentional or not, we're telling children, God made this 6,000 years ago. Even though the crazy evolutionists will tell you it's, 10 billion years old. Or, whatever he thought it was. He probably said millions of years because he doesn't know.
Yeah.
But if you would do a simple Google search, you would realize, whoa, wait a minute. Well, Google, I don't think Google was that popular back in 2006. But they would do stuff like that where, I remember they talked about Josephus. And how Josephus, they used if we're familiar with Josephus at all, the testimonium.
Sure.
Which is a known forgery. A guy used that in a sermon as historical evidence of Jesus. And if you do a simple Google search, you'd realize that is not at all. It's dishonest to say that. But we were teaching this to kids. So it wasn't so much for me the emotional draining and getting them on a spiritual high. It was the dishonesty in the information we're giving children that they're going to go out and tell their friends and hold on to that because they're trusting this pastor up on the stage preaching to them. Here's a guy of authority, and we're trusting him. And he says, Josephus wrote about Jesus, and that's a fact. And I was a part of promoting that, and that's what bothered me. That's why the main reason I could no longer work there. Like I said, it wasn't we're getting kids emotionally high. I think that's wrong to do that to them, and it's kind of squeezing God in because God wasn't strong enough to do it himself. But when we're starting to spread dishonesty to children and misinformation and making them think one thing when a simple Google search would fix that again, that's when it kind of just made me feel sick inside. And it was a mutual. It wasn't like,
You didn't go out with a bang.
No, it was told the executive director and him and I just... And I didn't tell him I was an atheist because I didn't use the word atheist then, or I didn't tell him I stopped believing in God. Just like, hey, I think it's time to get on with my life. I don't know what else I can do here. And I left camp, maybe I think it was October 2006, 2007. Could get the years wrong. And I went home, lived with my parents. I worked at McDonald's. I didn't know what to do with my life. go home, work at McDonald's. I had a year and a half of college under my belt. I worked at camp for 2 years, 2.5 years. Built up a pretty good relationship in the ministry where I could probably go any church I wanted to, any other camp I wanted to, and do the same work. And probably make a pretty good living doing it. But I couldn't bring myself to do that. And if I really wanted to, I could say, oh, yeah, I'm a Christian and I can make all this stuff for you and work for you. And I could get a pretty good job doing that. But so I went home and go to my parents, and I was pretty depressed for a while. I got a job at McDonald's. I had no clue what else to do. And I remember I went back there. They sent me an invitation to like a winter staff retreat. You know, ex-staff members go down there. And I go down there, and it was almost like people knew I wasn't a believer because no one talked to me. I went there with my girlfriend, who is now my wife, and I just kind of sat in the corner. Her and I just hung out for 2 days. And because I think it was getting out, because I wasn't out as an atheist, but I was publicly asking people questions like, well, why do we think this? Well, why do we think the Bible's true? And I knew for a fact the six-day creation story wasn't true. So I was trying to help other people, because to you it's like a new, door has opened. Like, look at all this information out there. The universe isn't this small anymore.
Right.
There's so much more out there, and I want other people to know. I was excited.
But you throw up that apostate shield.
Exactly, yeah. And as soon as I start talking about maybe the universe is billions of years, and it was exciting. I feel like most of my life had been wasted thinking the earth is 6,000 years old and being indoctrinated with that from the beginning. In my high school textbook, even as far as last year, they still use it, has the Palexia human footprints and dinosaur footprints. Familiar with that? Mm-hmm. They have pictures of that and say, see, this is the evidence. And that's a high school textbook. So that's what I was taking as fact when I went to camp.
What school district were you in?
It was Greenville, Ohio, but we used Christian textbook. It was a Christian school. It wasn't the public school.
Okay.
But we used it was Accelerated Christian Education is the name of the curriculum we used. But that's what was indoctrinated to me. And then I saw myself doing the same thing at camp. And I'm not angry with my parents for doing that because they thought they were doing the right thing. But if we're doing that at camp and then I knew I was doing it, when I'm telling kids I think the earth is 6,000 years old, it's like, that's a lie. I know that's a lie, but I'm taking part in telling this lie and indoctrinating these kids in doing that. So, yeah, and it wasn't probably till about a year after I left camp I first said I'm an atheist. Because when I would watch the camp videos afterwards, they had other people do it, it would upset me. It's like, I should be doing that. What am I doing with my life? I've abandoned, or I feel like I've abandoned them, but in reality, they abandoned me. A lot of my friends from that place stopped talking to me, had to rebuild social networks, and I was maybe 23 years old at the time, So I felt
it's
like...
tough to break that.
Yeah.
Us versus them.
And I didn't want that. I still tried to be friends, but they didn't understand. If you don't believe like we do, why do you want to, be friends anymore? It's like they didn't understand. And I went back down to camp because I was helping them with another project, and this was still not before I came out and said I was an atheist. But one of the staff members asked me, like, why are you come here? You don't believe like us. I don't understand why you come here and help us out. Obviously you're not a Baptist anymore. I said, well, I couldn't answer that, but I think I liked the social aspect of that. I missed that because for about 2 years, all of my friends were gone. Some people just straight up, never talked to me again. Deleted me, from Facebook, which is a huge thing, I guess. So
I think most of us have probably been through that to a degree.
Yeah. And my parents still talk to me. I never lost them. My dad and I discuss religion every now and then. But I never lost my family. But just that when you're living with those people year-round for 3 years and you're struggling with them and going through those emotional struggles with them, and that when you lose that, it's like that was my family. And when I felt like they no longer wanted anything to do with me. And over time, the current executive director, him and I still talk. We just had lunch not too long ago. We talk about religion and science. And
does he try to bring you back into the fold?
Every now and, yeah, I think he would like that. But when we start talking about the age of the earth, I think he's starting to, admit, yeah, maybe the earth isn't 6,000 years old, or God made it with the appearance of age, which is a huge step for him. And whether he'll admit that, no, he may get mad at me I said that, but my point is, I'm not trying to witness to you or indoctrinate you. I'm trying to say facts. These are the facts that we know, and what do the facts tell you, as opposed to telling 8-year-olds, this is what the Bible says, don't research it yourself.
Well, keep up the good work with him. Thanks for doing this interview with us. I'd kind of like to open the conversation up to everybody and steer it back towards just general conversation about indoctrination. But before we do that, are there any questions that you guys have specifically for Matt about his experience?
I was just going to say that first summer you were talking about sounds a lot. There's a lot of parallels with military training.
I thought it sounded like a boot camp or something.
Right.
Absolutely.
Like it sounded like maybe not as bad as a boot camp, but the summer camps that like junior ROTC does for high school kids, it sounded almost exactly like that.
Well, when you were talking about that, Matt, I was having Army flashbacks, seriously, and I hadn't thought about boot camp for a long time. And as you're talking about it, I was like, wow, I've experienced that before. And I don't know, I think I'd never experienced that within my religion, but you're right, that was so military-like when he was talking about it.
Yeah, and
it's crazy.
I would say, it's hard to say if it's intentional. We did this thing one time where we kept the kids up late, and it was about 4 a.m. We get military uniforms on, paint our face, break into their cabins, grab them out, put them in a van, drive them in the middle of the woods, and make them do all these obstacle courses.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Wow, that's... Hey, yeah.
That
was...
we did that one time, and, and it was fun for us, but looking back on it, it's like, man, we're traumatizing these kids and then preaching to them.
I mean, couldn't you really say it's a form of hypnosis, because you're keeping people off balance emotionally and mentally by changing their routine, sleep deprivation, that you're essentially hypnotizing them so that they're more suggestible.
Yeah, there's certainly a purpose behind that, whether it's...
That's why they do it in boot camp.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And you forget who you are. I mean, and I think it's also important. I mean, indoctrination is not in and of itself wrong, because if you think about the indoctrination that I went under as a Army, infantryman years ago, and we could think of other areas of life where I think indoctrination serves a very important purpose. When I can think of medical students, are indoctrinated to certain ways of thinking, but that's done to benefit the people they'll serve later on. So it's not in and of itself that indoctrination is wrong. It's what the teachings are about that really is the problem.
I guess maybe we could have tried to form some loose definition for what we mean by indoctrination, but I hesitate to agree with you, Russ, because in my mind, what this is, it's an intentional manipulation of someone's mind, and when you manipulate someone, you take away their freedom and their autonomy as an individual, no matter what their age is. So, to call medical study indoctrination.
Well, yeah. Well, let me give you my definition then. I mean, honestly, here's how I define this as religious indoctrination. It's a teaching or teachings that revolve around supernaturalism, superstition, or magical type thinking, and that demand acceptance with no option or of questioning or rejecting it. I mean, that to me is what I underwent as a young person my entire life, and my adult life too. I mean, I don't know if you guys agree with that kind of idea or not.
I think that's a apt definition, or at least characteristics of what happens to many children, especially in religious indoctrination. I wouldn't necessarily equate that to, as Brad was saying, to being trained for sort of a high discipline field. Yeah. I think that's more just of conditioning yourself to a rudimentary process. But I wouldn't say physicians are indoctrinated to the point where they can't accept things, or
Right.
they can't think about things or question things. I mean,
Sure.
we hope that they would.
Sure,
That's
yeah,
how they would improve their technique. But rather than just making something second nature, I think at least it has a connotation of being more than that. It's sort of implied to be negative. At least in my experience, what's the quote? If we waited till children were old enough to use reason, how few of them would actually go into their religion.
Yeah.
I think it's there's a tendency in religious sects to ingrain these ideas into the children before they're able to question or to see anything else, and then we sort of equip them with these blockers that keep them from looking up stuff or talking to people. I know I grew up in a cult, and their main things, in addition to the fatigue and the peer pressure and the fear that Matt described at the camp, they use isolation. We lived on a compound. We never left. You got your car fixed there. You ate there. You got your groceries there. Your haircut there. I mean, you didn't leave unless it was for something that you just couldn't be provided by the people. And before you left, you were told that these people are unbelievers. They're not like you. You shouldn't be unequally yoked with unbelievers. And I think that, although that's an extreme example, telling children not to question something, basically not to stop learning at this point, here's all the answers, don't grow, don't mature, don't learn. Everything else beyond that is confusing and fearful and painful. I don't know. I think that connotation, I think, is more extreme than any other. I don't know.
I mean, the whole intent is to isolate you from the world, right?
Correct.
We want to keep those voices out, and you keep those voices out, and that's how you keep the child indoctrinated.
It's all about information control.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say the problem that they have is, like, I went to Christian school till 8th grade, and the summer camp and winter camp and summer daycare and everything. And one thing is, if you even just have one parent that does not believe, that could be enough to where you're not indoctrinated. Like, it doesn't take a lot to keep that happening with children. Like, for my example would be, my father was never very religious, and I would watch Discovery Channel with him. So when I took creationism class, it was like the same time they had this big evolution miniseries on. So, like, I would watch that and talk to him, and he wasn't a believer really, so I didn't get indoctrinated. Like, if he was, that would be the only information I would be getting. So I feel like that's one thing that is good, is that it requires so much work to indoctrinate someone.
I mean, if you control the environment completely, where, there's no outside voices coming in, and the thing about indoctrination that bugs me is that there's all this information out there that kids could be exposed to that would get their minds going, and instead they get fed a load of crap and they believe it, and that question about whether it is intentional or not, that's how you're 35 years old and you're teaching a kid that Noah's Ark is real, that dragons really existed, and these things, do they really understand what they're doing?
It's an exploitation of the evolutionary need for a child to listen to authority figures. Sure. Because it's necessary for their safety. In order to survive, they need to listen to their parents, or, this is when you eat, this is where we need to walk because winter's coming, or whatever. So, a child is born looking to adults for answers. And if it just so happens that those adults themselves were indoctrinated and they really believe that Noah's Ark was real, or they really believe that, the earth is only 6,000 years old, they're going to pass that on to their children.
And most of these things aren't harmful. But when you start talking about hell, and that you're a sinner, and that you're worthless without God, you can't do anything without God, and you have no community outside of this community, this Christian community, and you take a bunch of young people, put them in a camp for a week, take away their parents, any other social, environment, and it's all designed right? To get you closer to Jesus and accepting the Baptist line or the
fear motivates.
Whatever line it is.
I mean, it's phobia indoctrination, fear of the outside world, like Eric talked about. Those people will take advantage of you. They will hurt you. They'll steal from you. You can't trust them. And even if they are just as good as the people in the church on the surface, they're not going to encourage you to draw closer to Jesus.
And I don't think it's always intentionally negative. Obviously, in most cases, the parents think it's for their own good. They don't know it's indoctrination. They justify it by saying, well, it's for a good purpose, or it's still the truth, even if we might say the tactics were poorly. I know, at least that's what I picked up from Matt's story, was that even before he was an atheist, he didn't even necessarily doubt God or Christianity, but he recognized that the tactics were unnecessary if the message was actually true. If there really was a God, or if these claims are true, you wouldn't have to deny them information, or only get them to admit this stuff under duress, or it was sort of, he questioned the tactics, and that sort of planted that little seed of doubt that, well, why is that necessary? And then he looked at the information and he realized why it was necessary, because the evidence against it was so mountainous.
We didn't live in our compound like a cult, but for 3 months you had 40 to 50 college students living together, working 18-hour days nonstop. So it was almost like you're in a submarine or in a compound, and the only people you're surrounded are the same people struggling emotionally like you. And you're not only indoctrinating the children, but you're doing that to the same summer staff. Our summer staff were college students, first year, second year college students, and we're doing that exact same thing to them, except over a longer period of time. And they're even more emotionally drained and more surrounded by that misinformation for a longer period of time, because it almost was like a cult-like setting where the only people you talk to are the people at the camp for 3 months, and you naturally form those tight relationships with them. So you want to go back. It's like, I miss those people. I don't see them anymore, but yet I've connected with them. So that's why they get so much repeat staff is, you think you're doing it for Jesus, but really you're going back to be with those people again, to have those relationships.
It's like psychological comfort of having camaraderie in a unique situation. Because
I can speak to myself. That bonding I had that first summer, where I'm working out in 100-degree weather, physical labor nonstop next to these people, and I didn't complain about it. I thought when it was gone, and I went to college, it's like I missed that. Why would you miss that? It's because I bonded with them. It, like almost like the military. You miss that connection you had going through that struggle.
Yeah, I can relate to that very well as a former Mormon missionary too. I mean, the environment. I think it served a good purpose of that training me up, I guess. That very restrictive time period, especially a very formidable time in a young person's life. Mm-hmm. When they're developing critical thinking skills for themselves. I think that's probably the underlying. I mean, I agree that it's not intentional in many cases, but the underlying effect is to just make them believe more and more and more, but without any option to accept or reject. I know everything that I ever learned growing up in the LDS Church was that it was true, but there was never a viable option given to me, that was something else I could select.
What I did notice, though, the second summer when I came on full time after the summer ended, and the summer staff left and the campers left, and it's just us. There was 4 or 5 permanent families. They had husbands, wives, kids, and they lived in their houses on the camp. Their houses were actually on the camp, and I had a house myself. I had a huge house to myself, 3-bedroom, 2-story, cabin, really nice house. I lived in there by myself, and there were 4 other, single people living on the camp with me. And I won't say, I realized once the emotion of the summer's gone, the campers are gone, the summer staff's gone, they're real people. They're not all gung-ho God all the time. They would miss church. They
watch rated R movies.
They would watch rated R movies. They would drink alcohol.
Yeah.
And I won't
Not a Baptist, no.
Yeah, and that struck me like, wow, this isn't as fun as it was once everybody's gone. It's like, what do I do on my days off? Because I had days off then. I had 2 days off. I had Sunday and Mondays off, or work week.
There's nothing to do in Portsmouth.
Yeah, there was nothing to do.
This is why they drank.
And there was nothing to do. And I realized, they're normal people, and fortunately, some of them looked at pornography on the camp, and it's like, these are what? So I realized it's not. Yeah, it changes the environment completely once that emotional high is gone and you're grounded back to reality. And then they still get into the routines again. Now we have a normal job. Summer's over. We work, 9 to 5, go back home and watch a movie or, go out to dinner. And so that was very eye-opening too, that they're not, it's almost a show, I want to say, for the summer staff and
for the kids.
Yeah, for the kids. And, not to say they don't honestly believe what they said and how they acted, but
they're still people.
Yeah, once they're gone, the people who's been there for years, 10 years, 5 years, whatever, and I realized they're not who I thought they were. They're normal people. It's then it's just that feeling is no longer there, and that sense of community, and no one wanted, what do we do now? Go about your normal lives, go to the, I went to a bar with a staff member there when I was there, when I turned 21 at camp. They took me to a bar.
Sucks.
Yeah. And I had one drink. I had never drank in my life, and I had a hurricane. I didn't know what it was, but they said, "Oh, I'll get a hurricane." So I drank a hurricane, and I remember I'm working at a Christian camp, and I'm not supposed to be doing this. And I remember, and I have no problem saying it's been, 5 years. I looked at pornography at the camp. I was human. I was 20, 21 years old, living by myself with internet in my two-story, 3-bedroom house. I was a normal human being. But I had no clue what to do with it. I felt so guilty. I prayed, and they're like, oh my, what did I do? Because I was living on a submarine with these people. I couldn't tell anybody about that.
You didn't nail it to the wooden cross.
Yeah, I didn't nail it to the wooden cross. I remember feeling so guilty. And then I remember seeing pornography on someone else's computer. They asked me to fix. They just bought a MacBook. They didn't know what to do. They asked me to fix it. I'm like, okay, I guess I'm not the only one struggling with this. I never told them I found it, but it kind of made me feel a little better that we're human. And even the people whose job it is to indoctrinate, they also feel that emotional high. And they get off on it too. And when they're on that pedestal, they're just like me. There's nothing, God doesn't spiritually protect them from this stuff like I thought. They're struggling with pornography as a 20-year-old, which I thought was a horrible sin at the time, so they're just humans. And
Did you ever have a kid come in through the program that was not fully into the indoctrination or didn't really believe, and were they pressured to believe, and what was that like?
Good question.
I remember hearing a story once. It was the year before I was there, but I wasn't a witness to. They thought someone was demon possessed. She was from, I think she was actually from Portsmouth, inner city Portsmouth, she wasn't raised in a Christian home. She was, I think they thought her parents, were Satanists, and I could get some of the facts wrong, so if anyone gets mad at me, forgive me, but I wasn't a witness to this. This is just what I was told afterwards. And she was caught, cussing, smoking, doing all these horrible things, and she started having a nervous breakdown. She started yelling at people and just going crazy. And evidently the male counselors or female counselors ever grabbed her and tried to hold her down. She was struggling, and they said, in the name of Jesus, come out of her right now. And she calmed down. And that was like, oh, well, see, she was demon possessed. So she wasn't buying into it, but she was surrounded by the people who were pressuring her to buy into it, and she had a nervous breakdown, and they took that as that's the demons fighting for her soul. From what I told, they held her down onto the bed, and someone with a Bible said, in Jesus' name, come out of her, and then she immediately calmed down. but I want to be careful in them saying, oh, you're telling us we're physically forcing kids on the bed. I wasn't a witness. I was told secondhand, so.
There was an exorcism.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of times they don't say the person's demon possessed.
Yeah.
They'll say they're under the influence of a demon, and so they'll pray with them, and they'll be like my brother watched a rated R movie, Nightmare on Elm Street, which was really freaky at the time, and he had some nightmares, and there was some prayer going on afterwards when he was having nightmares. But this anxiety thing you're talking about, that sounds like the whole camp experience was not going well.
Yeah, because it was, I'm not buying into this, or it's not my cup of tea in this, like, if we take this story, this lady's story as fact, that I'm not buying into this, but everyone around is pressuring me like, something's wrong with you. Why aren't you accepting this stuff that we're accepting? And she's getting emotionally drained and exhausted and constant pushing, and eventually she's going to break down. I can't escape. I'm surrounded by my camp counselor, the other campers pressuring me and, forcing me. And eventually, what do? I can't get away, so I just break down. So I think I don't know any kid that would come out and say, I don't believe in God at the camp. I didn't experience that myself, but I think if that happened, they would eventually either completely remain silent and not talk about it, or in a situation like that, have that nervous breakdown, because you can't get away from it. You're stuck there, surrounded by it, and they're going to pressure you. If it's not the counselors, it's the other kids. That's their job. The counselor's job is witness to these kids, push them to God, or guide them to God, not push them to God, because we don't want to force God on them, they say, but in essence they are. So,
as a kid, you want to be liked and you want to be included. So, I wouldn't think in that situation it would take a whole hell of a lot of effort to get a kid into line. Because they don't want to be ostracized for the entire summer.
And children naturally seek approval anyways from their peers and from
adults. Yeah.
And then
if all the important people in your life, adults, are telling you something is true, or real, kids kids want to believe things, and if you think about it too, kids' brains are wired to believe things long before they actually develop the brain power to critically analyze it. Mm-hmm. And so kids are just going to believe, it's easy to get a child to believe something. And if all of the important adults in your life are telling you that something is telling you something, whether it's true or not, I think there's going to be very little that a child can do to escape that environment. Really. I think of, and if you consider too, as they grow up and they become, teenagers, they start to develop those critical thinking skills, but all of their peers are then around them. That's that social core now that they're with. So even if they are thinking and doubting these things in their mind, I think it's seldom that they're going to actually verbalize it. I know that was my experience kind of growing up.
I think the Christian parent thinks they're still giving their child a choice, because they're putting them in an environment, where the Holy Spirit is there, and the Spirit will speak to them. And then, like when I was 8 years old, I accepted the Holy Spirit, spoke in tongues and all that stuff. But that was my choice to walk up to the front of the stage, right? Even as an 8-year-old. So that argument that I had a choice. But did I really have a choice? Because
you have the right to choose this or not.
Yeah, but
that's black and white. Here's the choice. You can choose this or not. There was no other option, is what I was saying earlier.
What we did with the senior high camp, the last day of camp, and even when I was deep into it, this bothered me. We had a rock group come in from a church. They play heavy metal Christian worship songs, and they would, raise your hands. But we'd have a sermon, normal stuff. Then about 10 p.m., they played a concert, a worship concert. Removed all the chairs from the auditorium. We just stand on the floor. You could raise your hands. And they did that and turned no AC in this auditorium. It was hot. We were exhausted. Played these heavy songs with the drums beating the electric guitar. The guy yelling at the top of his lungs, "Save me, Jesus," tear this sin away, like really descriptive terms. And we did this for 3 hours from 10 to 1 a.m. I remember that. These teenagers doing that. 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. for 3 hours, just constant worship. And then we would have an altar call. So you got a choice for the altar call. And the executive director would always say, the less numbers you have, the better job you're doing, because they're taking it seriously. So he honestly thought that, they did have a choice. And if we have less people getting saved or coming out as being saved, that means we're having to make that choice because it's more serious to them. Would you rather have 100 people just pretending to be saved or just 10 people really taking it seriously? But, like you said, do they have a choice? We've had them singing in a 90-degree room, worshiping a God, playing loud music for 3 hours after a long week at camp. Saturday night, 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. Every Revolution camp, we did this. And then we would have them come forward or, do an altar call or whatever. So,
we go back to the...
had a choice, but how real is that choice?
Right. Can we go back to the, getting woken up at 4 a.m. with guys in military garb screaming at you?
I was one of the guys in military garb.
Like, who came up with that idea?
It was... I'm going to get my facts wrong. I keep saying that because I know every fact to get wrong, I'm going to get beat up over. So
we don't have that many listeners, don't we?
We'll put our fact checkers on it.
Yeah, well,
what was the intent? I mean, what?
The intent was to, if I remember correctly, the intent was to, what would it be like if you get, captured and at the middle of the night and you had to stand up for your faith? Like, what if, someone came in the middle of the night,
survival training,
took you out of your bed and made you, stand up
Deny
for
the
God.
Holy Spirit. Deny the Holy Spirit.
Yeah. So what we did was, and this was, these were teenagers, not young kids. These were, probably junior, seniors in high school, So we get makeup and dressed up, get these vans, drive to their lodge where they're at, just wake them up, turn the lights on, yell at them, start yelling stuff, pull them out, take them into the woods. We had like a ropes course, an obstacle course, and make them do this obstacle course and, yell at them as they're doing the obstacle course, give them directions that they can't follow. The key was give them directions which are impossible to follow. Make them fail and then yell at them when they fail. Just like I can't, I remember I would have them try to do this ropes course and do it, without speaking. Then I would ask them a question. And when they answered the question, I'd yell at them, like, do you understand the directions? And no one would say, I said, do you understand what I'm saying? And they'd answer. I said, you're not allowed to talk. Give me 5 push-ups. I would really, the goal I was told was give them directions they will fail at. Make them fail, make them like frustrated. And they just woke out of bed. They just got probably 3-4 hours of sleep. So here we are dragging them into the woods, throwing them in the obstacle course. It's the middle of the night, make them do these ropes courses. Then after they did that, then they sat down for a sermon. So I think the goal, if I remember correctly, was what would happen if, because that was the theme of this week of the retreat they were doing, is standing up for your faith and under what circumstances would you be persecuted. And, they talked about if that happened in reality and the government or whoever came in and took you to the woods and put a gun to your head and said, do you believe in God? Would you say you still believe in God?
And they can do 99 great things, take them out rock climbing, all these wonderful things, and, teach them life lessons. They do one thing like that, and they've ruined the whole program. I mean, you've destroyed it. It doesn't make up for all that one event for a 17-year-old traumatic, experience like that. Takes away from the good, of a camp experience. There are secular alternatives, like Camp Quest, and it is a positive experience, I guess, for most of these kids. They're not doing that program anymore, right? So
they only did it the one time that I know of.
Parents probably complained.
Parents and
I really don't. It was a retreat, not during the summer camp. It was like an off-season retreat, and I just think they're probably like, we probably shouldn't do this anymore.
But that was with kids.
Yeah, that was with high schoolers, yes.
Go ahead, Elise.
Well, I was just going to say, I remember I was like 10 maybe in school. That reminds me where they were basically telling us, how if missionaries who were not supposed to be somewhere, it was like China or something, would get shot because they were missionaries, and you like have to deny God or spit on the Bible or you'll get shot. And it was good that they just died for their faith, basically telling 10-year-olds that you should be martyrs, that was the best way to die.
It's a noble thing.
Right. And like that's bad with 17-year-olds, but it just makes it's horrible to do that to kids, I feel like.
As a Jehovah's Witness, we were told that same kind of thing, that there is this sense of pride to die for your faith. We always talked about Armageddon's coming anytime, and you just don't know. You might be separated from your family. And like the Germans tried to get the Jehovah's Witnesses to denounce their faith in World War II, which is actually true because they were apolitical and they wouldn't go fight in the war. So they were put in the concentration camps alongside many other religious minorities, especially the Jews, of course. So that gets talked about a lot. That could happen again next week. We had to have a bag, and I don't think all witnesses did this, but it was suggested that you have a bag ready to go with like perishable food items and blankets and a flashlight and like a hatchet and a lighter and all these things in case like you got a phone call from a congregation elder to like go flee to a certain spot where everyone would be safe together. And you got to be at the meeting on Sunday because this could be the last meeting that we ever have. It could be the one where the safety zone for Armageddon gets announced, and if you're not there, then you're going to die at Armageddon. So, I mean, there's this constant fear put into you that people are trying to kill you because of what you believe, and that you have to stay close to the congregation if you want to survive.
And that's a thing that they would teach all the time, and even nowadays, everyone teaches that tomorrow is not guaranteed. You could die and go to hell. Do you want to take that chance? You could die tomorrow. Tomorrow is a gift from God. Accept God now. It's that pressure, they put on people. Like tomorrow you could be in hell, and why take that chance? Accept Jesus today, or like you said, Armageddon could be tomorrow.
Did they ever make people watch the Left Behind movies at the camp?
No, they never made people watch that.
HBO's got a new show, The Leftovers. Has anybody seen that?
No, I haven't.
I heard Nicolas Cage is doing a Left Behind movie.
Yeah, are they rebooting it, or is it just a new one in the series?
It's a reboot.
Okay.
With Nicolas Cage, so it's going to be good.
That should be fantastic.
Did they ever use Columbine as an example?
Yes,
because they
absolutely.
did that at our school.
Absolutely.
They tried to.
And from the research I did, I think it's a myth now where they always told the story where the guy held the gun to the girl's head and said, "Do you believe?" And she said yes. And that was a theme for one of the retreats was she said yes. And the whole story was that, this girl stood up for her faith. And in fact, that may have been the same retreat. We did the militant exercise, if I remember correctly.
I mean, is God really going to hold you accountable if you got a gun to your head? But I have a friend who says that if given this scenario, gunman walks in your house and has a gun to your kid's head and says, "Deny the Holy Spirit," and this person says they would not deny the Holy Spirit, and they would let their child die because the child's going to be in heaven with them. So but to deny the Holy Spirit is unforgivable sin.
Yeah, that's kind of a dick move, and I would hope, in theory, if there were a God, he'd be like, that's okay that you did that. Like, yeah.
You'd get a pass kind of for that, if you didn't.
But you have to understand that there's the life that we're in now is just temporary. It's meaningless. It's
Right.
It's the afterlife that where you live forever is a perfect being. That's what we're really after. Mm-hmm. And would you give up just 10 or 20 or 30 more years in this temporary wicked world in order to
jeopardize your
salvation? I mean, come on, who would do that?
It's appealing to a child, the fatalistic kind of stuff, because they're dealing with all these emotional things, right?
On the topic of indoctrinating children, I don't know if anyone's seen. There's a documentary called "Kidnapped for Christ," I believe, and it's one example of a growing trend of camps that are stationed in the Caribbean, which are a lot more rigorous. I have a good friend whose sister was actually sent there. She was caught with, I don't know, in high school, maybe pot or something. I probably got that wrong, but she did something that's fairly common that her mother overreacted and sent her to a camp in the Caribbean, which is extremely physically abusive. The tied down, taped. I mean, starved, physical abuse, mental abuse, and the specific camp that she was sent to is the subject of the documentary called "Kidnapped for Christ," and I guess it's not the only one, and that's actually spearheaded by a group in Indiana called New Horizons, and there's another example. It's in the news. I've seen it a few times in the past year. It's called the Good News Club, which is in a lot of the public schools even today, and there's a lot of political conflict and school board issues as far as how they allowed, where's the bounds is considered extracurricular, but it's being promoted. They're not being penalized if they don't go, so therefore it's acceptable. I know that's been in the headlines a lot in the past year, so really nationwide. I think they're a fairly large organization.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually each of those. There's a book about each of those things. There's a book. I think it's the same people who did the documentary "Kidnapped for Christ" have a book about it.
Right.
And then there is the Good News Club book that's the title, where she goes through and talks about it and the problems with it. That was Christian Stewart who wrote that book.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The Good News Club, that's like similar to Youth for Christ or Campus Life.
Something like that. I know that they're well funded. They do, it's basically, at least in the clips that I've seen, really young kids, and a lot of them weren't even necessarily brought up in really religious households. They're a lot of times really poor parents who can't afford other activities for the children or come for free food, whatever the situation might be, and basically trading their kid for these, to take care of them and agreeing to whatever basically the stipulations are. And it's really a high pressure sales pitch for, 5-year-olds, 4-year-olds.
Yeah, I dealt with that with my own child. So, they had a Good News. It was something like that. I don't think it was the same organization, but it was free cupcakes. And then all the kids were excited to go to it, but it was still sponsored by a teacher, and they're promoting it. The teachers are promoting it, and that's a clear line that they crossed.
Another thing is sometimes if they're like 6 years old, it's the same teacher that is their classroom teacher and in the same classroom. So they can't distinguish between school and after school.
They're told to trust these teachers.
Yeah.
I know the other subject, and then the same person's telling them, you will burn in hell if you don't do that. And so, you give them these directions to trust them, and then it's really an abuse of power. And I don't know.
On school, I know a lot of evangelical kids that their parents can't afford to send them to private school end up going through a homeschool program. Did any of you guys get homeschooled?
I had ACE like Matt, and I think
you
Elise,
used
didn't
ACE?
you have ACE?
I don't know what it was.
Yeah.
I just went to school.
You used ACE too, huh?
We had Bible class with workbooks and stuff. I don't know if
We had paces that was.
So you remember Ace and Pudge and those comic characters?
Nope.
No. Okay.
I remember the strategy was carrot and stick.
Yes.
You would at the beginning of the week you would put down how many pages in each pace you would do, and then you would get rewarded with these little gold star stickers, and you put it on your little planner, and it was basically you sat in a desk with blinders on and worked at your own pace, and then you raised your one flag, the Christian flag I think it was, to go to the bathroom, and the other flag to ask a question. But there was no teaching going on. It was all self-taught, basically.
You did that at home?
No, it was in a church up in Catskill Mountains.
Yeah.
I wasn't homeschooling at the public school, but a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses, and it's a growing trend in that community, homeschool their children, and it's a direct effort to seclude them from, because I would have never known a non-witness as a child, except for family who weren't witnesses, but we didn't really spend much time with them because we didn't celebrate the holidays, so we weren't at Christmas dinners and Thanksgiving dinner and Easter dinner. We didn't go to birthday parties, So I saw them occasionally, like once a year maybe. And but a lot of kids that I grew up with were homeschooled to protect them from being influenced by worldly children, who would get them to cuss and listen to debased music and would pull them out of the truth. And, so it's another form of information control, even though the homeschool program itself was mostly secularly oriented because there isn't a Jehovah's Witness sanctioned homeschool program.
Still the isolation.
Right. Yeah.
And I mean, there's good and bad to that. You know, your self. You rely on yourself to a certain extent, so you develop some motivation to learn on your own. But then the whole I got to 5th grade and I was behind in math and we didn't even have science in our, if I recall, but so it's doing harm to these children.
When you're in a community where you're being constantly told not to think and not to ask questions, that is not the type of child that's going to thrive in a homeschool program.
The problem with a lot of these Christian schools too is these teachers aren't accredited because they don't have to be. Like, everybody was behind in math for my school because they didn't even teach algebra until 8th grade, which normally you teach it in 7th grade unless they need the extra help. These are just parents who just some of them were parents that just taught, and then some of them were just people that went to the church and or people who grew up in the church just taught. There was no credentials required for Christian schools. There's nothing required. I don't even think you're required to have a college degree because it's not part of the public school system. They can hire whoever they want.
The only one that was accredited at our school was the kindergarten teacher because she also taught them how, the kindergartners and first graders how to read, and that was a requirement, I guess. Or maybe they just hired her for her skills on that, But I don't know what was wrong with the public school system that that it was free. Why not use the public school system?
Even when we were in the school, they were pushing the kids that public school is a scary place, that there's bad kids there, that you'll get beat up, that it's an awful place to be, and that it'll be horrible if you go. So they're pressuring the kids that way. That way, if your parents are going to pull you out, you will freak out on them. And they do that. They try to make you afraid of public school because of the teachers or the other students.
I mean, okay, so I didn't learn the F word until 4th or 5th grade instead of 2nd or 3rd grade, whatever. Does that, is that worth getting a half-ass education?
They took God out of the schools. There's no prayer in schools, and now, they're shooting in schools. So if you go to school, you have a chance of a school shooting. I remember being told that after Columbine, that see what happens when they take God out of the schools. Now they're shooting in schools, and that's why you don't go to a public school.
My parents were afraid that I would end up with a girlfriend who wasn't a Jehovah's Witness, or that I would do drugs, or which I don't remember ever being offered drugs or cigarettes or anything like that while I was in school. But it was talked about as if it happened all the time, right. And it doesn't.
Yeah. I remember I went to a Catholic school until 3rd grade, and then went to public schools, and you're like, oh, you have to watch out because not everybody there is the same as you, and being really scared about I was so scared and nervous about what it'd be like to be around scary kids and bad kids and all of that.
A lot of the psychology behind all this reminds me of that movie, and it wasn't necessarily a great movie, but The Village, where it's this artificial community where they raise these children up to think that they live in a specific time and place, and where in fact they're actually surrounded by the modern world and fenced-in location. They're afraid of going beyond the boundaries, and I think the color red had some significance to the movie, and a lot of that just reminds me specifically my experience, and it sounds like similar to yours, Brad, as far as just being isolated and really just the level of indoctrination and fear and being a part of this us versus them mentality, and all these plays on the emotion that just get them to accept something based on the fact that they believe they have really no choice, or it's the only choice. There
were some scriptures that were overemphasized my whole life, and I imagine they still are overemphasized among Jehovah's Witnesses. I can't remember the exact verse, but I think Proverbs 3:5 is one that says, trust in God with all your heart and don't lean on your own understanding. And then there's another one in Jeremiah, I think it's 17:18, but it's in Jeremiah at least, so don't quote me. But it's that your heart is wicked. Who can know it? Is the verbatim, I think, what the verse says.
And they teach children that.
All the time. I mean, so there's 2 verses in the entire Bible that indicate that you can't trust yourself and that you have to listen to what these people who are supposedly the mouthpiece of God say. Right. And, it's crazy. So you have absolutely no trust of. I mean, I didn't believe that I knew you know, I always look to somebody else for answers. And always look, even when I first started making my exit from belief, it's too easy to just automatically cling to what non-believers around you think instead of making your own path that's based on, you know, your own interests and your own beliefs about the physical world that are based in reality rather than in fiction.
My journey, when I was in Assemblies of God as like a 17, 18-year-old, seeing what the church was really about, you know, that it was about collecting money, you know, it was about, you know, putting money in the pockets of ministers. And so you start down that path of questioning, who are these people? You know, what's their motivation? What are they, you know, so it's from a righteous perspective, right, at first. And Matt, you were saying something to that effect, right? When you're seeing the problems in the relationships. Mm-hmm. And then they're, you know, just normal people like everybody else. They watch the R-rated movies and the...
Yeah, I remember when I first realized, you know, they some of them have alcohol in their house, and like if they knew that during the summer, it's like, holy smokes. The campers would know, you know, during the off season we grill out and have a beer. We have a beer and a grill in our backyard. That it was hard to explain how foreign that was to me. To see that, it's like you're watching it, but it's like it's not processing. It's like, what are you doing? It doesn't make sense to me. It's without being in that environment, it's hard to just get that down. Like you're seeing something that doesn't make sense. Seeing him holding a beer, grilling a hamburger, just doesn't process to me.
Is it kind of like when you're in school and you see your teacher at the grocery store?
Exactly, that's what it felt like. Yeah. You know,
they tie into this guilt cycle that Daryl Ray talks about a lot. You know, where everybody has sex, everybody, you know, does things that by the Bible wouldn't be, you know, good, and then they use that to get under your skin and make you come back for your forgiveness, and then you go back and have sex again or whatever, and you got to keep coming back for forgiveness.
Yeah, I mean it's, and I've felt this way quite a bit. They offer the cure to the disease or the problem that they create. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the more insidious things. But it's difficult to see, you know, we talk about, a general refrain here seems to be like this fog, fear, obligation, and guilt. And whether that is intentional or not, it occurs. It's occurred apparently in all of our lives, and everyone I know that is at least a Latter-day Saint. I'll admit that the place in human life where I felt fear, obligation, and guilt the most wasn't at work, it wasn't at school, it wasn't, you know, associating with friends. It was with my religion. And now as I reflect back on that with some critical thinking skills, it really kind of scares me to consider, you know, what I went under. And while as I listen to you guys, I think that the indoctrination that I went through is rather mild, but it makes me reflect on certain instances in my life where I thought, yeah, I went under the same thing. The same thing occurred to me.
Yeah, Jehovah's Witnesses won that weird off.
Yeah, that weird off on
the ex-Mormon podcast.
Yeah, there was an ex-Mormon podcast where they had a Mormon Jehovah's Witness weird off, and yeah. Brad, ever since meeting you, I've felt like yours was much weirder than mine.
We all have that feeling about Brad.
Thank you. So we talked about child indoctrination in our episode a few weeks back with Dale McGowan, that as a non-believer, there's also the risk that we might indoctrinate our children into disbelief. And, you know, what do you guys think about our ability as an adult to take away a child's freedom and pressure them into non-belief instead of just giving them the options and helping them, you know, find their own information and think for themselves? How do you find a balance between sort of shielding your children from bad ideas and helping them think for themselves? I mean, 5 of us here have kids, so.
Personally, I don't shield my children from bad ideas. I only have one child who's old enough to really be engaged in that conversation. And she spends a lot of time with her grandparents on both sides, and they're both devoutly religious. And so it does come up. And see, I guess I teach her in the same way that I've come to my opinions. I don't make any claims that there's no God, but I do tell her to withhold judgment until she can analyze the facts. She's asked me, well, how do you know there's no God? And I said, I don't claim that there's no God, but I'm withholding belief until there's sufficient evidence to justify it. So in a sense, you could say I'm teaching her the method, not the conclusion. I want her to be able to ask questions. How do you know that? How can you show that that's true? Rather than for me to tell her, oh, that's not true, don't worry about that. I don't just give her the short brush off answer. I try to ask her questions to see what she thinks about situations. She says, well, Mama says there is a God. Well, did Mama say how she knows there's a God? Or, I try to ask her questions to make her think rather than just me saying, oh, no, there's not. Don't worry about it. There's no God.
Yeah.
I want to engage her in the discussion and, question her questions so she kids ask odd questions all the time, and rather than dismissing them as being bad questions, I try to have her dissect what her sort of train of thought.
And I'm not in a position yet. My daughter's only 3. She's not really at the critical thinking stage yet. But as we were sitting yesterday doing a puzzle together, she was singing "Jesus Loves Me," and because my mother-in-law, who's very religious, teaches her those songs whenever they're together. Which I don't know that I have a problem with that, because I think it's harmless. But I'm approaching the time when those types of questions are going to start coming up, or when my daughter will start to say things that I don't disagree with. And do you react to that, or do you just leave it alone? Those are valid questions, I think. Russ, were you going to say something?
Oh, no. Well, I just think teaching kids that it's okay to ask questions about anything, that's very hard in the environment I'm in. I want to ask them questions at certain times, and one that I've done before is that, after a prayer over the meal, I say, well, how do we know that worked? What exactly happened? Tell me what occurs when you do this or do that, how do we know that, God is listening, for example, and then talk about how, well, it usually comes down to, well, I feel a certain way, well, then why do your feelings get to be an objective measure of what's real, and admit, I've willingly admitted to my kids that, look, the way I feel is not an objective measure of what's real and true. What is evidence and reason, and I think it's a struggle to instill in them, because I think growing up at that young age, they want to believe things. They want to believe things that are quite frankly magical, and it's easy for them to want to do that, and it's hard to get them to think critically about things. But I do it one step at a time. Whenever I have a little opportunity to ask a simple question, or why do you feel that way? What's actually happening? How do you know that's real? How do you know that's true? Those are the things I'm trying to do.
And it's not a fair charge that atheists are indoctrinating their children. If you're saying to your child, I don't believe in God, you're not saying, if you don't believe in God, then, or if you don't believe that, okay, I'm going to start over. If you believe in God, you're going to atheist hell, right? There's no penalty. There's no penalty for your child, so it doesn't have the same process, right? But if you're in a mixed environment where you have Christians talking to your children and you're the lone voice, then that's a little more difficult than if you have a lot of secular voices they're hearing.
Yeah, because you have people who are willing to give them answers and to give them the easy, intellectually lazy response that it's this way because I said so, not, that's a good question. Maybe you should do some research. And a lot of times kids just want an answer and then they want to go back and play. They don't want to spend a lot of time thinking about those things.
Why is the sky blue? And then you can actually tell them the scientific answer.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I mean, if one of us has a question, we can, get on the Google. We can look at all the research
Google.
And, we have the, capacity to really determine what's a good source and what's not. But let's say, someone's got a kid who's 5, 6, 7 years old. What are some good techniques for helping someone that age learn to determine what's a good source, or learn how to look at something and say, hey, this is true, maybe not?
I think just encouraging them not to ever accept something that an adult tells them because they're an adult. Right. I mean, just that general principle. You don't have to listen to anyone because they're an adult. I mean, I guess you would run the risk that they'll be a disrespectful child in school or something like that. But I think if you set the example to question authority without being disrespectful, that would help you be successful.
But do you think you could run the risk of them saying, "Oh, I'm not going to listen to this scientifically peer-reviewed research because an adult put it out there"? I mean, how do you help them determine what's good to listen to and what's not good to listen to?
I always ask my daughter, I say, well, how do you know that that's true? And I think sometimes I know her, she just wants to answer, Dad, just tell me the answer, you know. or she'll ask me, you know, Dad, why do we have butterflies? And I was like, well, maybe we can learn how butterflies come to be, but maybe why isn't a good question, or how, you know, and try to tune her questions to, you know, sort of turn around on themselves. And I think I do it too often where she just, you know, now she just wants the quick answer.
She's under your trick.
But what I do to answer your question is I try to have her push the question further. Like, how do I know this? Mm-hmm. Okay, there's the answer, but how do I know that that's the right answer? Can you show me, is it true? Can you measure it? Can you go outside and see it? I try to make her think one step before the question, sort of, or one step backwards.
Probably depends on the kid too. You have to tailor the approach to the child, and some kids are going to be naturally more inquisitive than others. And you know, do you want to annoy your child to the point that they stop coming to you with questions because they know you're not going to give them an answer that they're looking for?
Grandpa said God did it.
Yeah,
well, that's much easier than asking Daddy.
Right? Yeah. So it's tough.
And we can tell them, check it out for yourself. I mean, that's
A point Dale made in that interview was that, you know, we should remember that indoctrination is hard. You have to block out all these other external pieces of information, and most people are not in a situation to do that to their children. And if you're a non-believer and you're trying to raise a free-thinking child, you're like way ahead of the game already. I think the statistics that a kid who's raised in a fundamentally conservative Christian household actually remain in that form of belief are not that good. I mean, non-belief and atheism's the fastest growing segment of belief in this country. So I don't think it's something to be terribly worried about, but you want to be fair with your children and not do the same thing to them that we accuse religious people of doing.
There's also the, you know, when a child is, you know, when I came out of religion and discovered science, it was exciting, you know, to learn. And if you're raising a child with non-belief secular worldview and they get exposed to evolution and all these things, is it as exciting for them when they're 20 years old to discover that we came from apes? Probably not, but they still need to know that, right? So how do you foster excitement about science and knowledge and critical thinking and not, you know, overdo it?
I think Bill Nye's show does a lot for little kids. I mean, that's the whole point of his show, is to make science exciting and to have people ask questions in a respectful way.
Take your kids out from in front of the television and take them to museums and the zoo and to you know, a creek bed and you know, to spend time outside and where they're exposed to the natural world. And I mean, that's naturally going to generate questions from them about how things work.
Yeah, I think it was Neil deGrasse Tyson said he was asked in regards to a speech he gave about the poor science education in this country, and someone asked him, you know, what do we have to do to get these children excited about science? And he said, what do you mean? Children are already excited about science. It's how do we get the adults in a position where they actually are encouraging it? He said, a child will pick apart a flower in your garden, and that's great because it gets their, you know, they discover things and it gets them thinking. And but we're so quick to say, don't do that. Why'd you mess up that flower? We're so quick to sort of smack the science out of them, or you know, why are you breaking that? Why are you touching that? Why are you messing that up? Rather than, let's see what it's about. You know, let's see what happens.
Yeah, that's trying to create that wonder.
Yeah,
you know, that's the flower thing. Reminded me one time I was out with my boys and they found some bones out in the woods. I was like, oh man, I don't want to take the bones home. But they were so fascinated by the animal bones, and I thought, hey, you know what? Let's let them take the bones home. You know, I said, yeah, you guys can take all those bones home if you want to. You know, because they were so fascinated. They were picking them up and looking at them. How does this work? And I don't know. It's probably one of those. Hopefully, you know, maybe one of those times where my inclination was, oh, dirty old bones. We don't want those around the house. And I had to step back and go, okay, wait a minute. Here's something they got this kind of wonder about, you know. How do you do that? You know, I don't know the perfect way of doing it as a parent.
Yeah. Kids are, if you encourage it and make an environment for them, kids don't necessarily, I mean, some are more inquisitive than others, as was said, but they're naturally inquisitive about their environment. They start off not knowing anything about it, and they're on a journey to discover it. And it's telling them that God did it, or telling them not to ask questions, is the part that sort of stumps their maturity and their wonder, as you said.
Yeah.
My biggest problem right now is keeping our daughter from, quote unquote, ruining it for her cousins, and not only for God, but for because both my wife's siblings and my siblings are all very fundamentalist Christian, and it's getting our daughter not to ruin God, or don't tell them there's no God, or don't say anything to grandma who's sick, or about Santa Claus. And we just had this past weekend, our daughter lost a tooth, and we've never told her about that there was. She knows that there's no tooth fairy or Santa, but she wanted to test it, and she put the tooth under her pillow, nothing happened, and she said, well, I guess it's because I didn't tell Daddy, because she knows the cause and effect, how that would happen, why, how that showed that there wasn't a tooth fairy, at least for her perception of it. And so it's sort of not necessarily encouraging her to be inquisitive, but keeping her from telling her cousins there's no Santa or something, which is hard, which is another problem, because I'm telling her, think critically, could Santa really exist with these claims? And it's sort of counterintuitive to have to tell her not to do that to other kids, and I think that's a real shame. But obviously, there's other repercussions if you don't, and that's a hard situation to explain to at least a 6-year-old.
Sure. Why
can't her cousins know that there's no tooth fairy or no God, or whatever it might be?
Yeah, I kind of related that as I often thought that truth and honor are not the same things. For example, I think it's honorable enough to teach and even allow and even teach a child that Santa Claus exists, so long as the myth of Santa Claus is told to them at an age appropriate time. If it wasn't, if you continued the myth, it then would be dishonorable. The untruth of Santa Claus would then be dishonorable. I think the problem, as I see it, with the God myth is that it's carried on into adulthood. So I think there are things that, that are okay to teach kids, and they're honorable so long as the truth of those things are told to them at certain times when it's necessary.
I think it's good to tell the child, don't believe me, go find out for yourself.
Yeah, that's a good one, yeah. I
but
agree.
the Santa Claus thing, that's interesting. It's a step to get them to believe in God, right? And then, well, we pull away the curtain. God doesn't, or Santa Claus doesn't exist, but God still exists. Yeah. So you still have that warm fuzzy.
My wife maintains that the first time she ever doubted the existence of God was when she discovered there was no Santa. She sort of stopped and had to reflect on what she had been told her whole life, and was like, well, maybe if that's not true, maybe this isn't true. I never grew up with Santa, although I didn't grow up with God. But we chose not to do any of that with our kids.
Brad, I never told you this, but I just thought about it. And the way I found out there was no Santa Claus was in kindergarten. I had a good friend who his mother started, investigating the Jehovah's Witnesses. Mm-hmm. So they just told all their kids, look, hey, this is all bogus. And so he came and told the entire kindergarten class there's no such thing as Santa Claus.
What a jerk. I mentioned it in the podcast with Dale McGowan that I have a buddy from the South that I go see, and he's got 2 small kids, and his son said to me when I got in the car, he's like, hey, Mr. Brad, did you know there's no God? It's like the first thing out of this kid's mouth in the first 5 minutes of meeting him. And his older sister is a little bit more I mean, the parents are both non-believers, but the sister is offended by her brother's forthrightness, and because she kind of likes the idea of God, and so they kind of let her, think whatever she wants to think. But I'm curious to see what kind of awkward situations you get into, Eric.
Yeah.
Because I know that's coming from me too. All of my family are believers.
I want to break free. I want to break free. I want to break free from your lies. You're so self-satisfied. I don't need you. I've got to break.
Free Thought Dayton will be hosting